Welcome to the Reality Revolution. Today's episode will be about the transaction technique in Transurfing based on chapter 14 of the book Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland. The name of the chapter is Forward to the Past. And on recent episodes, I have done deep dives of different chapters in Reality Transurfing. The most recent one that I did was chapter 12, which was about frailing. Now, chapter 13 is coordination, an incredibly long chapter, and I've kind of skipped it for now. It's an incredibly long chapter with a very basic message, and that is, it's kind of the opposite of frailing in that you're looking at your own confidence and that there is no way to gain confidence through autosuggestion and those things, that you can reduce importance and coordinate your heart and mind, and it will help you to avoid pendulums. That's the ultimate summary of the entire chapter, and I will go back and go over different sections in it. But the next chapter is really fantastic. It's about time, moving through timelines, and how you can actually travel through time, not by going backwards in time, but by moving through timelines that have different versions of time. And there is a technique. It's very simple, and I have rarely heard it discussed on any channels that talk about transurfing, but this technique is something that you should try. I'm going to give a description of it, and then I would love to hear in the comments of what you saw when you looked for clear sight at the end, and I'll explain what that means. It's a 3-step technique, but in order to understand it, I just want to go over this chapter a little bit. The main quote in the chapter is, "The past lies just ahead." And in this chapter, it talks about shades in the scenery, it talks about the transaction technique, and then something called gliding. It's a fairly short chapter, and you might find some of this interesting. It's one of my favorites. I am personally very interested in lifelines, which seem to me similar to parallel realities. I'm very interested when they talk about shades of different lifelines. Those kind of things interest me. But what he's claiming in this particular chapter is a technique in which you can actually see the change. He's giving you an example of a way you can see the change. And so I want to know if you can see the change. This is a physical way for you to see the effects and power of some of these transurfing techniques. So in transactions, Zeland says, sometimes we hear a random song that suddenly reminds us of times in our life when we were happy, or we will catch the fleeting edge of a feeling we had when we were full of hope and life felt. If not like a holiday, then at least like the preparation for one. In these moments, we feel a wave of nostalgia for what has been lost. It is sad to know that these moments were somewhere in the past, and we can never return to them. Are these moments really lost forever? And let me ask you, do you have these incredible moments in your past that are brought up by songs, and those feelings that were in the past that you have forgotten about, like a holiday or something like that? In the foreword, Zeland promised to reveal the meaning of the words "forward to the past" towards the end of the book, and this is the chapter where he does it. Now, the time in this particular one is what he's talking about. Transurfing has already presented you with more than a few remarkable insights. You're probably intrigued as to what I will share with you this time. All tricks of time travel are distinctly limited to the realm of science fiction, despite the fact that theoretically physics does not exclude the possibility of time travel. Its physical application is still shrouded in doubt. Moving through time does not seem unrealistic, and yet it all depends on your perspective. It is like the model of the two-dimensional beings on a flat surface, who cannot see where the third dimension could be. From the point of view of fourth-dimensional space, our three-dimensional space also looks like a flat surface. The rational mind would say all these theoretical models are just abstractions, but I know what I see. Now, I will point out in the book Princess Itfat, in the first chapter that I read on the channel, he talks about a way to look into the past. He's saying observing it or traveling it. Check out my time travel meditation. I believe you can change your past. And I do believe that you can travel to the past in meditation. He's saying that he's not really talking about that in particular, but check out that. I disagree with him. I don't think we can necessarily physically move back in time, but we can change time. And even as Neville Goddard recommends, you can revise your memories of time, because really time doesn't exist. Time is just a memory of the past. All we have is the now. But moving through time, as Zealand says, does not indeed seem unrealistic, and yet it all depends on your perspective. It is like the model of the two-dimensional beings on a flat surface. So if you've read that book where it's Flatland, the storyline is where the flat dimensional lines end up being conscious, and then how would they respond to three-dimensional people? And from the point of view of fourth dimensional space, our three-dimensional space also looks like a flat surface. The rational mind would say all these theoretical models are just abstractions, but I know what I see. There is much in transurfing that seems incredible, yet I do not call you to believe the principle of transurfing. I urge you to test them out. Of course, this will require intention, some effort and patience, because the result will not be immediately obvious. In the majority of cases, outer intention works slowly and barely noticeably. It might be difficult for you to believe that this mysterious invisible force exists, that acts in a way unseen by the eye, particularly if you are still reading about it and have not yet tried to apply the principles of transurfing in practice. The moment has now come for you to see your movement through the alternative space with your own eyes. I just love that line. I get a visual of us moving through this quantum field. You will see that you are capable of moving through time, both forwards and backwards. It will not be like the time travel they depict in science fiction movies, for we are only concerned with the shape of reality. This time you will not have to wait for the results of outer intention. You will see the results straight away with your own eyes. It is no trick, neither does it involve experiments with moving into astral plane or the dream space. Now that's an amazing claim that he's making, that you can travel forward and back in time in the now, and that you don't have to travel in the astral plane or in dream space. For a few moments, you will really feel movement in time and space. In practice, the process comes down to a simple, single action, and in italics, he calls it transaction, which consists of 3 elements. Now, these are the 3 steps to the transaction technique. Have you tried the transaction technique? And if you have, again, leave a comment. To carry out the first element, you must remember your central meridians. If you've already been doing the energy exercises, you should be familiar with the feel of the meridians. Check out my meditation on the transurfing energy exercises. It's not mixed with anything else, and it just has straight transurfing energy exercises. And that is a good way to practice these consciously. Somebody that guiding you through it sometimes can remind you of the things you need to do, so you can do it with your eyes closed. It can help you to visualize it. So you start by scanning your body, relaxing any tension in the muscles. And then you picture your energy moving in the rising and descending currents along your spine. A useful method to activate your energy fountains quickly is to imagine that 2 arrows run horizontally from the center of your body, extending in opposite directions. One points forward and the other backwards. The arrows extend 20 to 30 centimeters or more from the body. Now picture both arrows turning at the same time. The front arrow turns upward and the arrow at the back turns downward. So you imagine the arrows going forward and back and then moving up and down until they're in a vertical position to the spine. you'll immediately feel a boost in the flow of energy. Now, this is not an exercise that was given in the Transurfing energy chapter. So the idea is, and he's even saying that you can do this while you're walking, but you just imagine the arrows are, what he's saying is you just have to quickly imagine the arrows going front and back, just like in Tufti the Priestess, which is the plat with flow technique, which is very similar because you extend the arrows outward and then you go upward. So you can see where the plat with flow technique is coming from, this energy boost. So you can practice this exercise either standing still or when you're walking. It is as if you are turning a key that switches on the central energy currents. So just right now, just do a quick experiment while you're listening. Imagine an arrow pointing out from your chest and back from your back. And let it go out maybe 20, 30 inches. And imagine the arrow about 20 to 30 inches. And then imagine the arrows shifting upwards, one going up and one going down. Woof, you can feel a little jolt right there when you do it. It's kind of crazy. I can. I've done that when I get the jolt when I do the plat with flow. But it's as if you were turning a key. There's no need to turn the arrows into fountains or to bring them together into a sphere. The important thing is to imagine being permeated by the flow of energy. It does not matter if you cannot actually feel the energy moving through you. A real sense of this will come with practice. So you do this exercise when you're going somewhere or simply out on a walk. It will give you a feeling of lightness and relaxation. Turning the key is the first element of transaction. That's the transaction technique that we're discussing. So you can apply this exercise at any time that you need to quickly enter a more relaxed state. Try turning the key many times during the day, particularly when something is troubling you. You'll notice straight away how the key releases tension. You're constantly carrying problems around with us, some small, large, and the weight of our problems is automatically reflected in our muscles. When you're walking along and catch yourself thinking about something unpleasant, troublesome, worrying, remember the key and turn it. You will feel a wave of relief as your muscles relax. Is it good to get into the habit of turning the key as many times as possible during the course of your day? Then you will always have a way of releasing and cleansing the energy of intention from excess potential that brings you down. Consider the exercise the key to the conditioning box that oppressive circumstances like to lock you up in. It will not free you of importance, but it will considerably ease the process of release on an energetic and physical level. The second element of transaction is to visualize the target slide. I recommend that you go to my episode on understanding how to visualize target slides. I have an entire episode. There is a special and unique technique to transurfing as a form of visualization. It's very similar to Neville Goddard. But what you do is you imagine yourself inside this. You imagine yourself inside this slide rather than watching it like a scene in a film. You see yourself in a situation where the goal has already been achieved, where the wish has already been fulfilled. To connect yourself with the slide, imagine what you would be feeling if you were living it in reality. Touch the scene with your hands. Imagine the sounds, smells, or any other sensation that easily comes to you. Turn the slide in your thoughts for a minute or more. The transaction process is most effective if you practice it when you are relaxed and walking in a familiar place. look to the side, but in order to focus more clearly on the slide, it is better to lightly hold your gaze somewhere on the ground just in front of you. Once you can more or less clearly see yourself in the slide, gaze ahead of you with a look of conscious awareness. Do not think or analyze anything. Just take in with a clear sight whatever you see ahead of you and further into the distance. So he's saying, once you do the second element, which is to visualize the target slide, while you're walking, and you immediately look and take a clear sight to wherever you're at and far into the distance. Do not think or overanalyze anything. Just take in with clear sight whatever you see ahead of you and further into the distance. Clear sight is the third and final element of the transaction technique. For a few seconds, there will appear to be a change in nuances of the scenery. And so that's my question to people. That's what he's saying. I want you to try this, and I will create a walking meditation. It'll be a short walking meditation that you can do while you're walking. And maybe I'll do it 20-30 minutes or something. And the whole idea will be that you do this, turn the key on the energy exercise, you visualize the target slide, and you take clear sight into the distance. Once I do that, I want to get your return. Is it me? Because I see it. I see like a shade in the forward area of what I've just visualized. I've seen where it's brighter, more colorful, clearer, sharper, in the distance where it should be more blurry. In a few seconds, as he says, there will appear to be a change in nuances of the scenery. You might, for example, he says, it will be as if you had seen it before somewhere. Not the specific details of the scene, but a certain feeling, mood, or aftertaste. You might, for example, look at a house that you've seen many times, but on this occasion notice its color or lighting and understand that somewhere in different circumstances you have experienced something similar. In some cases you might have a distinct feeling that you know the scene from something that has happened in the past. You will no doubt have already come across this bizarre effect, or when a feeling from the past suddenly streams into your conscious memory. It is not a memory of the past so much as a feeling from the past, a déjà vu. We experience the déjà vu effect quite often. It is just that we do not always notice it because we accept situations at face value. In other words, we are sleeping through a daydream. Transaction, on the other hand, enables you to notice how the world is changing before your very eyes. You may experience a vague sense of something familiar, or the opposite, since the appearance of a new, unfamiliar hue. So what is really happening in these moments? The material realization of the layer of your world is moving in the alternative space. Essentially, what you're seeing is a change in the shades of the scenery in the stage set. As you know, different sections in the alternative space have different scripts and scenery. So what I'm wondering is if we do this technique and then we add a plat activation as well, it might be even more powerful. And so I'll do a walking meditation, something that you can walk with for about 30 minutes or as long as you want. And I will add a little plat flow with the gaze at the end, because it seems and feels to me like that is what you can actually see the new script getting loaded up. And in many ways, this chapter may be the first prelude to the plat technique, because it's using the plat flow exercise. And so it's a way of us activating our plats before we knew it. So what you're seeing is a change in the shades of the scenery and the stage set. Amazing. Think about that. As you know, different sectors in the alternative space have different scripts and scenery. Depending on their relative distance from one another, the differences between the sectors may be more or less pronounced. As a rule, the movement of material realization takes place evenly, and for this reason barely noticeably. You will not perceive the movement, just as we do not perceive the movement of the minute hand on small clocks. Dramatic changes in shade are only felt when there is a sharper shift from one lifeline to another. This is also when you begin to see signs that clearly draw your attention. During the transaction process, visualizing the slide strengthens the force of the wind of intention. In these moments, the quality of your thought energy significantly differs from the frequencies of your current lifeline. The turning of the key strengthens the energy that programs your thoughts, and as a result, the movement of material realization through the sectors accelerates, and clear sight attunes you to waking up and capturing the moment of change. Clear sight enables you to perceive the changing shades in the scenery for the short moments that the gust of wind lasts. The transaction exercise should be performed dispassionately, in the same manner that you would clean your teeth or brush your hair. You might not get it straight away like riding a bike. We cannot ignore the fact that during the process of transaction, you touch on outer intention, that elusive power that cannot be controlled. This is amazing that he's claiming this. And there may be some level, doubters are going to say that it's just mental. And that's why we have this YouTube video, because there's a comment section, and in the comment section, when you try this, or with the walking meditation that I create, I think that it's amazing. So he says, don't get hung up about it if the transaction exercise does not work straight away. It will work. It took me about 3 times, maybe the second time. Pretty sure I saw something the first time in my own case, but for sure I saw it the third time. And he says, make your attempt spontaneous. So it's not something that you try every day. It's not a repetition. I'm going to go for a walk every day and do the intention technique. Because it's trying too hard, according to him. It's do not try too hard. Do not strain to achieve the desired effect or place too much importance on the technique itself. If you really are squeezing, you're pulling away from the flow, and if you're forcing it, you're not going to see things. It's maybe like fishing. I don't know. You might happen upon a completely different technique that works for you. Do what feels right and comfortable, and practice lightly at odd moments during the day. The less important you make the transaction exercise, the better the results will be. Once again, the Chinese finger toy of importance. As long as you do not take it too seriously or try too hard, it should come easily. You might think that if you repeat the transaction often, the process of moving towards your goal will be rapidly accelerated, and you would be right. The problem is that you cannot always consistently perform the transaction exercise impeccably, i.e. dispassionately, because the old habits of desire spoils things. If you set to burdening yourself with the transaction exercise, you will be expressing the powerful excess potential of the desire to get a result as quickly as possible. Potential will also be created if you become absorbed with the necessity to act and put pressure on yourself to do the transaction. Necessity is also an excess potential, which is why I always urge you to simply enjoy the process of visualizing your target slide. rather than making demands of yourself. The potentials of desire and necessity drain the energy of intention to such an extent that there can be no gust of wind. And without the wind of intention, the transaction will not work. So if you have deep desire and it's necessary, it will take away the intention. It has to be done playfully and light. So I will try to create music and an environment in that walking meditation that is playful and light. The purpose of me doing these sort of deep dives is to learn, but also to apply these principles. We're not just reading this stuff. The reason this stuff is so effective, as he says, you have to test them out, as he said earlier. As he said, he's not calling for anybody to believe these principles. You don't have to believe them at all. Test them out. And this is something that you can test out. You can do it. So remember that potential will also be created if you become absorbed with the necessity to act and put pressure on yourself to do the transaction. Necessity is also an excess potential, which is why I always urge you to simply enjoy the process of visualizing your target slide rather than making demands of yourself. The potentials of desire and necessity drain the energy of tension. That is the important thing to remember. As soon as you catch yourself desiring to see a result, take a break and begin again later. Likewise, if you find yourself tensing up because you are trying too hard to fulfill the transaction perfectly, leave it and try again later. Only practice the transaction exercise from time to time out of curiosity and with the aim of enjoying it. Do not take the transaction exercise too seriously. Its only purpose is to enable you to see the movement of the force of material realization in the alternative space. Of all the transurfing exercises, most attention should be given to running the target slide and visualizing the current link in the transfer chain stream into realized pathways of reality. Outer intention, which is, imagine the outer intention when he says those words, is God. It's an easy way to quickly understand. Outside forces being manipulated by your own mind. Outer intention works whether you see it or not. It is just that now you have a kind of porthole into the alternative space and the opportunity to observe your movement there. It is quite impressive. You will not be disappointed. Now, this section is interesting because I don't think he begins with the idea of time travel and doesn't entirely explain himself fully. And what I can say is he's saying that there are feelings from times in the past that are in future timelines, and by moving through timelines we can experience these times. He goes on to say that now we shall have a more detailed look at what you're really seeing as a result of the transaction of technique. It all sounds so unlikely that doubts will naturally arise. Might it be the effect of some kind of illusion created by the workings of human perception? Where is the guarantee that you are seeing is the change in shades of scenery as you shift from one sector to another? As Zealand has said in the past, and as you know yourself, in dreams we see the external appearance of people differently from normal. When you see a reflection in a mirror, the face you see is yours, and at the same time someone else's. Familiar scenes take on totally different look. You recognize the streets and the houses, but they look different. The real world also changes with time. Trees grow, houses are painted different, colors, and all these changes are natural At the same time, the movement of material realization through the alternative space does not follow a simple straight line. So how can you distinguish the scenery of one line from another? So think about it. You imagine this quantum field, and there's movements going through it, where suddenly in that area, all the space becomes real. And so he's saying that in different timelines, the neighborhood can look nicer or different. Have you experienced this? That one of the main motivations I've had in doing this podcast is because I experienced changes in my timeline that were so different. Everything was so different around me that I thought perhaps I was going insane. The hues, and I believe I'd gone through a wonderful shift to an incredible lifeline, but it was so traumatic and different. Not necessarily traumatic, but dramatic, that I had to go and seek out and find and confirm. I'm still in that journey and process. But what a wonderful thing. I'm grateful for it happening. There's no doubt about it. You could say that this would be impossible if it was not for the old invention of the photography. Look through an old photo album. If you look at the background view captured in the photographs, you will not be able to distinguish differences in the shades of the scenery in different lifelines because the appearance of a physical location changes anyway due to natural causes. There's a more reliable method of distinguishing between lifelines. Compare the faces of the people in the photographs taken at different times. You would expect the faces to change in a linear fashion as a reflection of the aging process, and yet you are seeing something else. A person's appearance significantly differs in different photographs, and yet the change is not purely linear. Even if you discard the effects of different hairstyles and compare photographs of the same person from the middle of their life when the face has not greatly matured or aged, you can see tangible differences. You are looking at the same face, but it is somehow different, and it has nothing to do with getting older, changing one's hair, or even expressing different emotions. The face seems to have taken on a different countenance, having acquired a different quality. This is the difference in the shades of the scenery. You already know that people change. You just might not have paid particular attention to characteristic differences in the shade. Leaf through an old photo album and you'll be surprised. In some people, the difference can be so pronounced that when you meet them several years later, you do not even recognize them. If you compare photographs of yourself taken at qualitatively different periods of your life, you will notice a significant difference in shade. Now, I'm wondering if shade is translated differently from Russian, but I understand the meaning and it makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? I mean, I think he's saying more than just shade. It's like almost a filter. You'll begin to get a picture of what your realization looks like in qualitatively different sectors of the alternative space. And I have noticed that when you look around, when you're in the good timeline, everything seems brighter. The environment around you seems brighter. It's not a filter. Surely, the photographs in the album must also take on a different shade while you are moving through sectors of the alternative space, and that's a question. Indeed, they do, but it is almost impossible to catch changing shades and nuances in basic objects. If you practice transurfing, focusing your clear sight on a bed or cupboard, you will not notice any change. This is why I recommend practicing the transaction exercise outside where changes can be perceived rather than a very simple environment. Oh man, so this is our first walking meditation. Is going to be the transaction walking exercise. A lifeline is a chain of sectors that are relatively uniform in quality. The sceneries of a single lifeline are also relatively uniform. When the layer of your world shifts to another lifeline, there's a change in scenery. Depending on the extent and quality of the difference between the lifelines, changes in scenery will manifest either as nuances and shades or significantly transformation. In any case, you will observe a qualitative change in shade. So where is the time travel I mentioned in all this? When we move along lifelines in an organic manner, we swim synchronously with time, as with the current of a river. Material realization proceeds through the alternative space like a roll of film in a projector, and it is this movement that we perceive as time. In order to move relative to time, you would have to move forwards or backwards against the flow at a faster speed than the flow itself. It would be as if a picture in the film had suddenly started moving along the film roll. In this sense, time travel is genuinely impossible. In other words, you cannot move forward or backwards in time within the same lifeline. This would be a contradiction of the laws of cause and effect. However, theoretically, it is possible to move through time between different lifelines. Transurfing does not claim to have the answer to how this can be done. Besides, we are looking at time travel here from a slightly different angle. Why is it that a feeling of the past sometimes bleeds through during transaction? Now, he's saying transaction technique, that you get feelings of the past. The following gives a rough explanation of this phenomenon. Some of this stuff is when Zealand is at his physicist best. From early childhood, the heart intuitively moves towards its goals through the necessary doors. In childhood, we are still on lifelines that would lead us to our goals. Maybe you had a childhood dream, or maybe you were not aware of what you really wanted, but your heart will have known nonetheless. And yet in life, we are more influenced by destructive pendulums than we are by the dictates of the heart, to say nothing of the long line of negative branches where everyone passes through due to a tendency of negativism. All this taken into account, you gradually shifted further and further away from those initial lines that lead to your goal. By performing transaction, you're being shifted in the opposite direction and arrive at a lifeline where you've been previously, only now your position in time has changed. That section of the former lifeline that you may have traveled along is now in the past, but you have returned to the line itself. Every line has its specific inherent features, tastes, and tones. It is these shades that you experience in the moment of clear sight towards the end of transaction. Do not be confused by other differences, such as the way a house looks in the morning and how it looks in the evening. The contrasts between different lifelines are something quite different. You will know what I mean by this when you have experienced the feeling. This is the return to the past we're talking about. By going forward to previous lifelines, it might not be quite as exotic as you were expecting, but it is real. Imagine what a huge detour you have made by straying from the path and wandering around the forest for so long. However, now is not the time for regret. Now is the time to delight in the fact that you once again are gradually returning to your own path, for the majority of people never return. You may not necessarily experience the shades of a line you've been on before if the path to your goal lies via new lines you have not previously traveled through. In this case, a return to former lifelines happens rarely or not at all. Lifelines in the alternative space are deeply intertwined, and indeed there is no need for us to know how exactly transurfing works. At times you may think that you recognize the shades of the scenery, and at other times everything will appear new. It may occur to you as you observe a familiar view that there is something new to the scene, particularly a tone or shade. Zealand wants to emphasize that these new details are not the kind of change that you could perceive without doing the transaction exercise. There are new subtle tones, styles, moods, meanings, themes, or fleeting feelings. You will understand exactly what Zealand means when you try it. You can do it. The only thing is to avoid trying too hard. The mind can spoil everything with its addiction to control. If you catch yourself straining to perceive the shades, it is better to pause and come back to the exercise later once the desire to get an immediate result has faded. Remember the rules of the transaction exercise. It will not work if you are in any way tense. Believe me when I say that you will experience the result easily and naturally if you just lift your little finger of outer intention. The opposite is also true. Your efforts will be transformed into the futile straining of inner intention if you try to force a result. If no change in shades is noticed during the transaction exercise, it means that the quality of the current line already meets the necessary quality of the realization and the visualization. This indicates that you are transmitting the energy of the current lifeline and that your goal lies ahead on this same line. Because whatever the case, if you do the transaction exercise from time to time, you will notice a transformation reflected in the shades of the scenery. Shades are not only perceived in familiar views and landscapes. Even when your clear sight tests on a scene you're seeing for the first time, you may experience a fleeting sense of something long forgotten or a sense of something fresh and new. There is a difference between the feeling of experiencing something new and observing something that is unfamiliar to you. When you look at an unfamiliar view, you simply state as fact that you are seeing the place for the first time. You do not notice anything peculiar about it. During the transaction, you will have the distinct feeling that something new has appeared in the scene that was not there a few seconds ago. You will definitely feel it, according to Zealand. When you do not perceive the shades, you will be amazed at how real they are when you do perceive them. Admit it, reading this book, you probably are not fully convinced by the reality of the alternative space and lifelines. I am convinced of it, but there may be somebody listening to this that isn't convinced. Are you convinced? Are you convinced that there's an alternative space and that there are different lifelines? And if you start thinking of your life with lifelines, I'm convinced. When you do see that what Zealand is talking about with your own eyes, he suggests that you do not be afraid. It is no mysticism, and neither is it purely a result of the nature of human perception, as you might think. Soon, you will discover other signs indicative of the shift to new lifelines that cannot be explained solely by the nature of perception. You might begin to feel that the way other people treat you has changed for the better, without any evident reason, or that certain day-to-day problems have disappeared. Generally, you will notice that certain attributes of everyday life have changed, although you cannot see any particular reason why this would be so. For example, a clock that stopped working many years ago has unexpectedly started working again. Under normal circumstances, clocks stop working due to a natural clogging up of their moving parts. If you clean them, they will work fine. However, very often clocks, household appliances, and electrical equipment will suddenly stop working for no apparent reason or break down when their owners lose a state of balance due to stress or conflict. Have you ever had this happen? The breakdown of equipment is not caused by excess potential, for this energy is too minor by comparison and is not directed differentially such that it could cause any sort of mechanical change. The energy connected with negative experiences induces a shift to a lifeline where balance is disturbed. So yeah, I had a super stressful move this one time, and in a 2-day period, my washer, dryer, and refrigerator all stopped working. And I knew for sure that it was related to the way that I was dealing with everything, my reactions. Have you ever had anything like that? It's interesting. Nothing appears to change, and yet something is not right. Something seems unsettled and awry. It's as if the scenery of the stage is at the same time, but the lighting is different. The transparent air has become clouded with the pall of dust, or the water is muddled. These slight changes are capable of affecting sensitive household appliances and other complex technology, for which a pall of dust is a tangible phenomenon. There's a certain type of person whose life always seems to be falling apart. People like this are always off balance due to being absent-minded, excitable, tense, or worried. Sensitive appliances that find themselves on the muddy lifelines of these poor individuals fail. So if your clock has suddenly started working again, it suggests that you have managed to shift to a pure lifeline. Do not be overly concerned if you cannot get your clock to work at all. It might just need to be repaired. Now, you know that as well as traveling through the alternative space, you are also, in a sense, traveling through time. You cannot return to the past, but it is possible to retrieve the free feeling of the new hope and happiness that was lost as a result of moving down a chain of negative branches. Earlier on in previous episodes of the podcast, we talked about why the feeling of freshness in life fades with time. Moving towards your goal is like returning to the past when ice cream was delicious, hope was bright, and life was still joyful and promising. Do not despair. The past lies just ahead. So that is the transaction technique. It seems simple, and the purpose of this is not to increase your manifestation, to speed up your manifestation. The purpose is entirely for you to see actually visual evidence of changes in the alternative space or the space of variations right before your eyes. And for me personally, what I have found is it's a way to test my target slide and the effectiveness of my technique. Once I read this chapter, I remember being so excited and wanting to run out and try it out right away. And you're going to probably want to too. So absolutely go and try it. What I'm going to say is that the harder part is the target slide part, because you're used to doing target slides when you're in a meditation or when you're sitting. So it's good to also practice running target slides while being physically active. There is something that happens when you're physically active that seems to generate more intention energy, and that's why it's interesting that this is like a later technique, but he's saying it's a way to test the effectiveness, or even just to see the results in the distance. You can actually see physical reality in the outside world changing before your eyes. Just imagine that. Full implications of that. So definitely leave your comments if you've seen or experienced anything with this technique. Let's treat the comments like a laboratory and see and test these techniques and see if they do work, because they worked for me, and it has been a way for me to test the effectiveness of my target slide. It's a good thing. I just enjoy going on walks, but he says not to do it every day, and for me, I wanted to do it every day. So maybe try to do it like 2 or 3 times. Take a couple days off. Do it playfully. Do it as an observer, and just relax into it. I think that's the best thing that you can do for this technique. He also makes a little hint at the end of that section where he's talking about you may find something that works better. So the great thing about that is the flexibility and adaptability. And so let's collect what maybe variations that we get in these comments. So go ahead. Let's share if there's any variations that you have on this technique, and we can always add these in later and build a movement-oriented meditation exercise. If you watch my interview with Stephen Barnes, he has this morning routine, and his big thing is doing affirmations while moving. They're much more effective. Just doing them with your exercises if you're lifting weights or doing something like that. And so there is something to the physical movement that may generate electricity on some level that increases the intention energy that you're using when you're applying one of these techniques. It's easy to get into meditational states to control the mind, but we're also dealing with energy, and the body and movement seems to be a powerhouse of a reality creator. And so it's good to experiment with the walking meditation. One of the best walking meditations is Dr. Joe Dispenza's, and I just think that meditation in general is misunderstood. I've already hit a number of pendulums with my own meditations because people say that there's only one kind of meditation and you only are doing it for one reason and there's only one path. But there's a process that we all go through in learning and getting to know ourselves, and part of that is going inward by closing our eyes in stillness. And part of that is going outward and looking around and becoming aware of our environment, of our universe and our lives, the energies around us, and watching and seeing this incredible creation all around us. And so it's fascinating to me. A lot of times when we just talk about these concepts, I remember in the past I would, in the back of my head, still be questioning whether or not stuff like this worked. And this is directly a technique that you can use and test, and you will see a change. In the far distance, you'll see a shift. If you do it right with the right timing, following the technique is the way I described it, you'll see a shift in reality right in front of you, before your eyes, like magic. So I just want to thank you for joining me on these excursions as we explore these techniques. And I have some more Neville Goddard stuff coming up. Hopefully you got a chance to check out the episode on the 3 most powerful techniques to manifest your reality. Join my Facebook group, The Reality Revolution. There's a good chance when my book comes out that I will give my book out for free to people that are on that group, in that group at the time that the book is released. And also, it's just a great place to talk about different meditations and bring your own content if you want on that group. I'm information sponge and I want to learn all the time. And so the more you can contribute, the better that my content can be. For coaching, you can go to advancedsuccessinstitute.com. Check out all episodes of The Reality Revolution. Right now, all 133 episodes can be found on therealityrevolution.com. This is episode 132, and it's amazing the journey that we've gone on with this podcast. From the very beginning, my goal was just to create a space to explore meditations and information and research, and it's become so much more. It's a community of some really cool people that I've met along the way, and I've got a chance to interview some great people, and it's great to join all of you on this journey. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'm incredibly grateful for every single subscriber out there that has joined me, and I can't wait for new content in the future and trainings, and so many cool things are happening. It's incredible. Welcome to the Reality Revolution.